and Vice Chair of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. Welcome. I'd like to talk to you about Jane Doe. Jane Doe is the fictitious name of a very real mom who lives in Texas, raising 2 children with her husband, both of them in elementary school, her children. She also is working to get her GED. She works at home to raise her family and to take care of her mother, who is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Jane Doe sounds like she is a part of the quintessential American family, but Jane Doe lacks status. She is undocumented. She came here as a child and still has not obtained status, though she is raising 2 United States citizen children. Jane Doe is one of the Dapa Poderosas, the 3 women from Texas who intervened in the United States versus Texas lawsuit to represent millions of others who would benefit from deferred action for parents of Americans, except that that program is flawed. Jane Doe and the millions like her are part of why the NHLA has, throughout its history, championed immigration reform, in particular, making sure that the Congress acts to provide legal status and protections to those many millions who have been here raising families for years and years. We also support deferred action programs like it, initiatives like it, until we can get the Congress to work on reform. NHLA stands for immigration that is in the best interest, immigration policy that is in the best interest of the entire country and that would benefit folks like Jane Doe. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning. My name is Janet Murguia, and I'm the President and CEO of NCLR, the National Council of La Raza. Today, I want to tell you a story about Marielle Guzman from Akron, Ohio. Marielle found herself in a situation where she needed to borrow some money in order to help pay for her mom's surgical procedure because she suffered from diabetes and had a procedure she wanted to be able to do in order to help her mom. And so she found herself needing to find some extra money. Of course, Marielle works really hard, but it is a minimum wage job. But she decided she would go to the local payday lender. She ended up taking a loan for about $500 to help her pay for this procedure. And of course, she signed all the paperwork and worked really hard and tried to make that payment, but was cut in her hours, so couldn't make that monthly payment. And found herself in a situation where she just rolled over the loan and paid the additional fees for that extra $50. But by doing so, she ended up agreeing to keep that loan, and they charged those extra fees. So for her, she really had to make some tough choices. She was struggling to put food on the table. She wanted to make sure she could keep paying rolling over that loan, and couldn't seem to get down to that principal at all. And so the fees kept mounting, and in the end, she was paying about $2,000 in fees for that $500 loan. You know, these predatory practices are very much a part of our landscape right now in the U.S. And these institutions that offer these services are unregulated. And I think that for us, at the National Council of La Raza, at NHLA, it's important to recognize that these folks need trusted financial institutions that they can turn to. They need to know that they can go to a place for help and not be taken advantage of. When you keep rolling over these loans and adding up those fees, you find that these situations are the very situations that add to the economic challenges of so many of our families are facing already. So we support regulations in this unregulated industry that would help put some guardrails, both on the amount of average interest rates. Up to 390% is what that is right now. And limit the number of times someone can roll over their loans. These types of regulations and protections for our community are essential if we're going to be able to help them navigate through the many economic crises that they can often face. Because one step down this path puts them in a debt trap that they may often never recover from. So we support these regulations that would offer these kinds of protections and guardrails so that our communities can have a fair chance and have fair products that they can use and not discriminatory and predatory practices that are going to be taking advantage of them. Our hope is that we will see these types of regulations approved and realize that there are many, many other people in Marielle's situation. And if you want to find out more about how to help in this issue, go to the website at nclr.org and you'll hear more about some of the challenges that families face in this area and what to do about it. Thank you.
Good morning. Buenos dias. My name is Juan Carlos. I'm the President and General Counsel of Latino Justice Pearl Deaf in New York City. And I have a story about an amazing man. A man who I first met when he was behind bars. A man that I met because I wanted to instill upon him and learn from him what he thought were the most important issues regarding criminal justice reform. His name is Stephen. I met Stephen when I was looking for clients. I met him in a New York State prison. He was incredibly bright, knew exactly what we were trying to do. He wanted to ensure that he can vote in the United States, even though he was behind bars. He wanted to ensure that his voice can be heard on criminal justice reform. He became my client. And after that, I learned so much from him. I learned that Stephen is just one of many Latinos and Latinas who are affected by the criminal justice system. I learned that the consequences of a charge, of a conviction, stays with people for life. I learned from Stephen that we shouldn't call them felons or ex-cons. They're persons who are formerly incarcerated. They're people like you and I. And then I started learning that the effects of the criminal justice system continue to exacerbate the worst elements of exclusion and marginalization. He couldn't vote. In many cases, it was hard for him to find a job. With a criminal history, he's like so many of us. There are 1/3 of us in the civilian labor force who have a previous criminal record. 1/3 of us. He was an amazing advocate for himself and for others like him. From Stephen, I learned so many things about being effective in exercising his right to vote. He was unable to vote until he finished parole. He was unable to vote, but then he finally voted. So that's a good story about Stephen. He voted. Yes, he voted. He was so proud about that fact that now he does radio programming in New York City to help other people behind the wall know their rights and learn about the issues today that affect Latinos right now. One last thing I want to tell you about Stephen. So Stephen was convicted, actually, of a drug possession charge. This is back in the day when drug possession was treated quite differently than it is today. When law enforcement now talks about people with compassionate care. Because the face of drug addiction is different today than it was back then. My wonderful story about Stephen is he was able to overcome those issues. He was able to demonstrate that not only was he concerned about his fellow persons in prison, but he was concerned about the effect it had on people communities around the country. In Stephen, I deposit a lot of faith. In Stephen, I know that all of us together can overcome the worst elements of the criminal justice system that affects so many of us in so many ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. I have props. Buenos dias, everyone. My name is Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. I'm the Executive Director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. I'm also proud to be the co-chair of the Latina Task Force and the Health Committee for the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. And today I'm going to tell you about Rosa. Rosa is a 32-year-old mother of 3 children living in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. Like 1 in 3 Latinos in this country, Rosa lacks health insurance. In November of 2011, after the state of Texas slashed funding for reproductive health care across the state, Rosa found a lump in her breast. She went to a reproductive health clinic to get health care, but was ultimately denied care because she could not afford $500 for the ultrasound. Rosa went back 4 months later because she actually experienced pain in her uterus. And once again, she was unable to get reduced fee care because the state of Texas slashed funds, and the clinic could not afford to provide low-cost care. 6 months later, she tried again. She went back because she felt that perhaps the funding was restored. And again, doors were closed for her care. 6 months later, she found herself in the emergency room because her pain has gotten so excruciating that she had to get emergency care, and they finally learned what was wrong with her. She had a cyst that had grown so big that it could impact her ovary, and the doctor said if she didn't get an immediate surgery, she might have to face a hysterectomy. 32 years old. Fortunately, she was able to get that surgery because the county was able to offer her care. However, she was unable to get the follow-up care that was needed to ensure that the surgery was successful. Clinic after clinic, doors after doors were shut on her. Either the fees were too expensive or the wait times were up to a year. This impacted Rosa and her family. Her husband had to take a lot of time off of his job to care for her. Her 3 children watched in desperation, wanting to help their mama, and couldn't do anything. And Rosa said herself, as we documented in the Human Rights Report, having doors shut on you everywhere makes you feel like you're in a desert where there's no help, no one to lend a hand. We shouldn't have Rosas in this country, in the United States. No one should have to face the difficult choice of putting food on the table or getting the health care that you need. A delay of health care is a denial of health care. So we are fighting to ensure that all women, all people, can get access to the reproductive health care that they need no matter what. Because a majority of Latino voters believe that women should get reproductive health care, whether it's contraception, a pap smear, abortion care, or a breast exam, without political interference. And at the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda and at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, we are fighting to ensure that all women, all people can get the reproductive health care that they need, and we will achieve salud, dignidad, y justicia. Thank you.
Buenos días. Buenos días. What a great day. It seems like a lot of people went to the Latino Unidos event that we co-organized. It's good to see everybody here about these important issues. My name is Hector Sanchez, and I'm the Executive Director of LATLA and the Chair of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. I want to thank Tom, Janet, Jessica, and Juan for putting this conversation in perspective, because this is about real people. This is about Latinos and immigrants in the nation. But this is about talking about policy priorities. And that is why we're here in unity as a coalition to really send a strong message about the policy priorities that are critical
for the Latino and immigrant community in the nation. That is why, as we celebrate the 25th anniversary as a coalition, in the strongest that we have ever been, we launched a public policy agenda this year. We have a lot of copies here in the room, so we can take some with you. But it's the strongest, most inclusive agenda that we ever had as a community and as a coalition. It talks about issues that in some cases in the past we didn't talk in this particular agenda. Now, as Juan reminded us, we have a very strong and powerful space on criminal justice issues that seriously affect the community. We talk about environmental issues. We're so happy to say that it's the most inclusive gender agenda that we ever had. It's very inclusive on LGBTQ issues and many other issues that affect our community in the nation, because we're not a single issue kind of community. Everything affects the quality of life of Latinos and immigrants in the nation, and this is the message that we send, because this public policy agenda is the guide that we use as a community for the next 4 years to make sure that we send strong messages to the leaders in the nation of where we stand in unity, as you can see on the different policy priorities. And that is why a year ago we launched the presidential engagement campaign as a coalition to make sure that we send a clear message to those that want to be president on where we stand as a community. So immediately we invited 1 year ago all the presidential candidates to meet with us and talk about our policy priorities. We received response from 3 of them, all of them from the same party, and I want to clarify that all of us here, and today we are not partisan, so everything that we're discussing is strictly on policy issues and priorities and education for the community. So we invited all the presidential candidates. We received a response from 3 of them, all of them from the same party, and they came and met with the coalition to discuss our policy priorities. Then, based on our agenda, we created a questionnaire of 20 different questions that are reflective of our policy priorities. And we asked for commitments to these presidential candidates. We received responses again from candidates of one particular side of the aisle. And then the next step is we're going to publish a voter guide after the elections are over for Latino voters in the nation, a non-partisan voter guide, just so there is an understanding of where candidates stand in the nation. We had events at the Republican Convention, and we have events here to make sure that there is a clear message of where the Latino stands. It's a clear message of unity, and there is no confusion of what are the policy priorities that we have in the Latino community. Before we start with the program, I want to make sure we recognize all the principals of the different organizations that are here today. This is historical to see so many leaders of our coalition. We are the coalition of the 40 of the most important national Latino organizations. I want to make sure I mention each one of them and hold your applause until I finish with everybody. Tom Sanz is the NHLA Vice President and Maudef President General Counsel. Jose Calderon, President of the Hispanic Federation. Juan Cartagena, President and General Counsel of Latino Justice Project. Dr. Yanira Cruz, President and CEO of the National Hispanic Council of Aging. Rafael Vázquez Pantausi, President and CEO of the National Puerto Rican Coalition. Al Gallegos, President of the National Association of Hispanic Federal Executives. Bruce Goldstein, President of the Farm Worker Justice. Jessica González Rojas, Executive Director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. Amy Hinojosa, Executive Director of MANA, a National Latina organization. Dominica Lynch, the new President and CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. Robert Maldonado, National President of the Hispanic National Bar Association. Marta Montoya, President of the National Association of Hispanic Publishers. Janil Morguia, President and CEO of the National Council of La Raza. Dr. Elena Rios, President and CEO of the National Hispanic Medical Association. Kenneth Romero, Executive Director of the National Hispanic Caucus of the State Legislators. Arturo Vargas, Executive Director of NALED. And Brent Wills, Executive Director for Lula. All of them are in this room. And this is the kind of message that we have when you have 22 of the 40 principals in the nation with a common voice saying these are policy priorities. I also want to thank my dear brother Milton Rosado, the President of LACLA, and all the LACLA board for being so flexible and supportive on this role that I have played as the chair of NHLA. Thank you, brother, and thank you to the LACLA board. I also want to thank our main sponsor of the event, Univision. They have been a fantastic partner. Jessica Herrera Flanagan, Tanya O'Connor, and our great friend Ron Estrada. Thank you, Univision, for your partnership, and thank you for bringing attention to all these important critical issues for the Latino community. Quickly mention and recognize some of the people that are joining us today. Thank you, Ambassador Carlos Sada of Mexico, for joining us and coming to our last board meeting to engage on the discussion of the Latino issues. Ambassador Martin Losteo of Argentina. Dolores Huerta, I think she should be here in a second. Thank you, Sister Dolores Huerta. Lilian Rodriguez Lopper, our former NHLA chair. They are also here. Muchas gracias. Now let's start with our program, and I want to particularly thank Maria Elena Salinas for your flexibility. Maria Elena, I know how busy you are, and the Friends of Univision to make this happen. You have a fantastic voice leading these kind of conversations. She is the Univision News anchor and the alternate known to millions of viewers in the US and Latin America. She is the winner of multiple prestigious awards, the Peabody, the Emmy Award, the Edgar Moore Award. With that, welcome Maria Elena, and let's start for
Thank you so much, Hector. I had prepared remarks to begin the day, but I have been inspired by one of the stories that I've heard, so I think I'll tell a little story of my own. You know, can I sit down? I don't want to give anybody my back. My mom told me that was not good manners. So, I'm going to tell you a short story that at the same time is a long story, and it's a story of a community that I am part of, and a community that I got to know a little bit better about 35 years ago when I became a journalist at KNX Channel 34 in Los Angeles. At that time, it wasn't such a small community. It was 14 million Latinos across the country. And I remember that very early on in my career as a journalist, I realized that there was a huge need for information in our community. There was a thirst for information. They needed to know what their rights were. And I realized very early on in my career that the political empowerment of Latinos was going to be a mission for me in my career, for a lot of us that work in Spanish language media. Well, at that time, there were a lot of issues that were of concern to the Latino community. And from those 14 million, year after year after year, there were more and more Latinos. They were coming in as immigrants, but more importantly, there were families that were being born here. And now we move forward to 2016 and we have 58 million. So this is a community that grew very fast. And just as fast as the community grew, so did their issues. It became a community that's not only large, but one that is much more sophisticated, that is much more demanding, that is much more engaged. And now I don't only have to think about and worry about as a reporter, as a journalist, to inform them of their rights, but more importantly, of their responsibilities in our society. So this is a community that has many leaders, as you mentioned here. Many of them are here. And these leaders have been working very hard for very many years to uplift and the image of the Latino community. And suddenly, the 2016 election process begins, and we begin to hear things about our community that make many cringe. Because when you attack the undocumented immigrants in our community, when you attack part of our community, I think the majority feel that it is their responsibility to defend them and to have a voice and to give them a voice. And that's why I think that this very negative rhetoric that we have heard in the campaign this year has really alerted a lot of people to the fact that we need to be more engaged, more aware, more than ever. We have 28 million Hispanics, according to the numbers that we get from LEO, that will be eligible to vote this year, and hopefully 13 million of them will vote. But will they vote? I think that is a concern of many people. I know that what I have done and what we have done at Univision for many, many years is to try to encourage Latinos to go out and vote, and to go out and participate, to become citizens, to be engaged. And what we don't want is for people to stay home and think that this is, that they're disappointed. They're disappointed because they have some in the political system that are insulting them and others that are taking them for granted. So I think it's very important now that we are here and that we're talking about these issues, that we're talking about the issues that affect the 58, 56, 57, 58 harbor, depending on whether you believe the census or the Pew Hispanic Center, either one, the millions of Hispanics that are here, the issues that affect them and concern them. And then we also have the issues of 11 million undocumented immigrants, which, by the way, are not all Hispanic. There are several from Europe, from Asia, and from Africa, and from all over the world. But still, these are undocumented immigrants, many of which are here to give a contribution, to contribute to this country and help make this a better country. So that's my story, and I think that we should continue now because this story, of course, doesn't have an end. The story continues. This is just a little, I think, bridge in the story in which we have all these great leaders that are going to give us their insight to make sure that the issues that affect Latinos are not just talking points that we talk about year after year after year in our conferences, but that we take these talking points and try to put them into action in one way. So thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Arturo, let's begin with you. So as I mentioned, there's been a lot of attention here in the media about the fact that there's a record number of Latinos, 28 million that are eligible to vote in this presidential election. What are some of the key issues that we should be concerned about related to the census and the change in the demographics in our nation? And are there certain voting right issues that threaten the ability of these voters to participate in this election?
Thank you, Maria Elena. As you mentioned, do we believe the Census Bureau's numbers? You mentioned 55 million Latinos in the United States today. But just earlier this year, the National Educational Fund and Child Trends released a study by Dr. William O'Hare that found that 400,000 Latino children younger than 4 years of age were not counted in the 2010 census. And what does that undercount of Latinos do? It denies our community political representation and resources in the communities where these people live. Because the census is about two things. It's about power and it's about money. And if we are not counted, our community is denied their due in political representation and resources for all the programs that our children and families need. So we're only 3 years away now from the 2020 census, and the Census Bureau is now in the final stages of planning 2020. And we want to make sure that the Census Bureau understands that they need to eliminate the differential undercount of Latinos versus non-Latinos. But the 2020 census will be radically different from any other census we've experienced. The Bureau wants to count all of us now online. So everything we know about the digital divide and access to broadband is now a major concern. The Bureau wants to use administrative records to fill in the blanks where those forms left incomplete or not returned. And the Bureau needs to cut its spending, so it's going to reduce its workforce, which means hiring less Latinos from the communities where Latinos live. So we will have a major challenge to make sure every single one of us is counted in 2020, because those numbers are then used to reapportion the House of Representatives, to redraw electoral districts, so that we then can vote for candidates of our choice. And we're about to vote in 2016. And while we have some visionary election leaders, like Secretaries of State Nelly Gorbea in Rhode Island and Alex Padilla in California, who are trying to expand the franchise and make voting more accessible, already 19 states have taken steps to restrict voting, make it harder for people to vote. States like Texas that implemented a voter right default, where by our analysis, 771,000 Latino adult citizens do not have the ID to vote under this Texas law. Thankfully, the Fifth Circuit, through the leadership of Maldiv and other law organizations, has declared that law invalid. But make no mistake about it. As we have a greater impact in voting, there are those who have political power, who would like to maintain the status quo, keep power where it's due from our community, and will be acting in ways to keep our community from growing. So we need to make sure that not only our community votes, that our community is informed of the rights and responsibilities so they can exercise their freedom.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Bruce, I want to come to you now and talk about the economy, which is one of the most important issues in the Latino community. As we know, by 2020, Latinos are expected to comprise 19% of the U.S. labor force. NHLA has called for a $15 wage increase and other worker protections. Are these recommendations enough to target or remedy and remedy the economic crisis that some Latino community members face, especially farm workers and low-paid workers?
Thank you, Maria Elena. There's a lot more that we need to do to ensure economic opportunities for Latinos in this country. The working people in the Latino community are disproportionately in low-wage jobs, and many of those low-wage workers are facing great challenges. Raising the federal minimum wage and state minimum wages is one of the most important things that can be done, but there's really a lot more that needs to be done. Some of it is about enforcing the law, some of it is about culture change. It's about accepting responsibility among businesses. There are many businesses now that are subcontracting and misclassifying workers as independent contractors. It's kind of an escape from responsibility, saying I don't really employ those workers on my farm or in the building that I own. They're subcontracting and saying that subcontractor is responsible. And then often the subcontractor isn't given enough money to pay the workers or pay the taxes that are owed on the workers' wages. So there's an escape from responsibility, and we need to promote businesses that are taking responsibility for treating workers well. And we need to improve the way we enforce our employment laws, including the minimum wage, so that all of the businesses that are taking advantage of workers accept their responsibility as employers. There are some very basic benefits that many workers are not getting, like paid sick leave, paid vacation pay. Those things need to be mandated. As you know, I'm the president of Farm Worker Justice and National Advocacy Group for Migrant Farm Workers. Farm workers are among the very lowest paid workers in this country. Not only are their wages low, they get almost no fringe benefits, such as basically the paid vacation. And many times they are subjected to these subcontracting schemes where the farm owner says, I don't employ any farm workers on my farm, it's that labor contractor. The labor contractor wasn't given enough money to pay the workers legally, and the worker can sue the labor contractor, but that labor contractor, which is a business, often doesn't have the assets to pay off a court judgment. So there are a lot of obstacles that still need to be overcome through a variety of mechanisms. The National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, public policy agenda, includes many solutions in public policy for that. More enforcement of the employment laws is really important. But at the root of a lot of this exploitation of low-wage workers is our broken immigration system. Many employers feel comfortable taking advantage of undocumented workers, and many undocumented workers are too fearful of deportation to challenge illegal or unfair conduct. Many farm workers, many low-wage workers in the building industry, they're afraid to join a labor union for fear of being retaliated against, being fired because they are undocumented and they fear deportation. So immigration reform with a path to citizenship for the undocumented workers is really key to helping Latino workers in our labor force. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wish I could ask you what's the solution to that, but we all know. Well, we've seen the growth in the numbers of Latino businesses grow from 2005 to 2009. Latinos also experienced a profound economic blow resulting in a 66% decrease in wealth. So the racial wealth gap grew to white households holding 10 times more wealth than Latino households who were interviewed in 2013. Now, Janet Woodley. What are the few concrete things that can be done to address this wide margin of economic disparity beyond buying lotto tickets?
Yes, that's a good point. It's first going to say thank you for the voice that you have played for our community. It's very reaffirming to know that those folks who our community is relying on to deliver the facts and the news in the reality of what we're facing is being done by someone who actually understands and has that perspective. Your voice and your presence as a portal for our community to the issues that they face is something that we are really indebted to you for. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Look, this is a really important area, and a lot of times in the policy world, people sort of eyes glaze over, but the economic policies that we need to be pursuing on behalf of our community are so important. When it comes to this wealth gap loss, a lot of that was a result of the recession and the housing crisis that resulted. Many of our families had gotten into situations where they're trying to purchase homes. The loans that they created, the criteria around it, could not be met. They were underwater in terms of not meeting the needs of the financial payments, so they ended up losing their homes. What we have found has been a critical step for our community, in addition to foreclosure prevention efforts that can step into intervene partnerships with financial institutions and others to educate our folks about how to refinance is important, but more importantly is from the very beginning to have homeownership counseling services. When we're able to walk our families through what it means, all these terms, all these difficult challenges when they're going through trying to access a loan, but understanding what is going to be required of that, we found that the vast majority of our community can not only make that purchase and buy that first-time home, but stay in it and keep it. I'm proud that NCLR is the largest Latino homeownership counseling network in the country. We provide services like that across the country. It has been critical because we've helped over 60,000 families purchase their first-time homes. But that's not enough. We really need to make sure that in this financial marketplace, for people like Marieli, who I talked about, that in addition to the policies and regs that the institutions that are built to protect them, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we fought as a coalition hard to establish, and some people are threatening to dismantle, we must protect these institutions that are out there and really oversee the best interests of the most vulnerable. So that's really important. But beyond that, there's other ways where we can work to step in on policy areas that are going to make a big difference. Everybody talks about the student loan debt crisis. Well, our community ends up being impacted by that as much as anyone else. We need to support policies that will provide relief when our students are overburdened with debt, but also make sure that we can have, again, access to reasonable opportunities for our folks to be able to finance their education. A couple of other areas, just briefly, is that on the workforce side, Bruce talked about the importance of making sure our workforce is getting the minimum wage raised so that they're able to have a living wage that can help support their families. But what we're finding is that there are some barriers for our folks to even get into the workforce. And many of our communities need to transition in terms of their jobs and skills to other sectors. We heard about the gap in broadband and the access to the internet. 50% of our Latino, 50% of our community does not have access to broadband. We're in a digital economy. If we are not helping connect our community to the internet, we are failing them in their ability to be able to succeed. Having that kind of access is important. Other areas like tax credits. You hear this issue about tax credits. Well, these tax credits are not just for the business and the wealthy folks. We want to make sure that those tax credits are serving the most vulnerable. We were able to see as a coalition, most recently in the last budget, see another tax credit extended on behalf of vulnerable families. That additional help at the end of the year for those families helped lifted hundreds of thousands of our families out of poverty. So that, and finally, Social Security. We rely as a community on Social Security benefits at the end of our work lives more than anybody else. But yet we have the least access to Social Security benefits or to other retirement plans. We need to make sure we're working and engaging in policies that are going to make employers provide retirement plans for all of their workers. If we don't, we're going to find ourselves at the end of that process unable to benefit and help our families when we need it most. And the reality is, and Maria Elena was reporting on this, more of course of our community, even though they're undocumented, are contributing to the Social Security Trust Fund to the tune of $60 billion over the last 15 years. And many of them will never see the benefits of that investment into the trust fund. It's another reason why ultimately comprehensive immigration reform is going to be one of the biggest boosts that we can provide, not only for our community, but for the country. It will restore financial, economic empowerment for this country and for our community.
Thank you. As a coalition, of course, all of you have made it very clear that Latinos are not a one-issue community, but it is undeniable that the Latino community has been uniquely impacted by the immigration laws or lack of laws in our country. Tomas, you are the chair of NHLA's Immigration Committee and the only non-governmental attorney involved in U.S. versus Texas oral arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court. You have spoken very passionately before about what you're calling SCOTUS non-opinion, or lack of. Tell us a little bit what this means and how does this impact DACA and DAPA recipients?
Well, as you know, Maria, the Supreme Court deadlocked on the question of whether President Obama had the authority to initiate deferred action for parents of Americans and to expand deferred action for childhood arrivals. Now that is a temporary non-decision, and ultimately the outcome of that case and the power of this president and future presidents to exercise the authority that their predecessors have long exercised to engage in discussion about immigration enforcement. The decision about all of that lies in the hands of a full Supreme Court of 9 justices. And that matters in this election because who sits on the Supreme Court is a matter of not only who the president is, but who sits in the Senate, and to the broader issue of immigration and relief for those millions who would be eligible for DAPA and expanded DACA lies in the hands of the Congress, including the House of Representatives. So NHLA, as you know, has long been supportive of immigration reform that would provide legal protections, pathway to citizenship for all those millions of Americans raising families but without the protection of the law. But as you also know, immigration reform goes well beyond that, and it includes the kinds of issues that we've seen throughout this administration. Too many deportations and removals, too many deportations and removals that target folks who are not enforcement priorities by anyone's reckoning. Too much of a concentration on border enforcement. Too much of a failure to recognize the flaws in our system and to enforce our laws with a cognizance of the racism in our existing immigration system that creates the longest waits for immigrants from Mexico and from any other country in the world. The flaws in our system that does not treat Central American refugees like the refugees that they are, but instead treats them differently. And the other flaws that we see in how we provide benefits and support to immigrants from all nations. So the decision in November is not just one about who will be on the Supreme Court and ultimately decide the U.S. v. Texas case, but also about who will be in Congress and take the steps necessary to provide relief from our flawed immigration system and promote the prosperity of the nation by engaging in changes not just in policy, but in practice across the board.
I have a follow-up question. We know that we want to know what NHLA's position is on deportations, particularly because this administration has deported more undocumented immigrants than any other.
But we need an immigration system that is fully enforced uniformly across the country, and that's part of the problem. We have announcements from the President and Secretary that are not then followed by the rank and file and move to deport people who do not fit the priorities articulated by this country. NHLA's position is that there have been too many deportations, and at this point we need to pause and figure out how we're going to implement uniformly nationwide a program of immigration enforcement that is fair, that is just, that recognizes our priorities as a nation, and that recognizes the flaws in our existing law, and takes steps to provide relief until those flaws are fully addressed by Congress.
Thank you very much. Well, across all the issues that have been discussed here, Latinas are uniquely impacted by migration, by economic issues, with Latinas earning less than any other worker. I think it's 77 cents a white woman earns to each dollar that a man makes. In the Latina situation, it's 54 cents to every dollar that a man earns. So, Jessica, what do you think that lawmakers should be doing to address the unique needs of Latinas?
I want to lift up something that Hector said earlier, and he talked about Latinos not being a single issue community. And the late great R.J. Bard said, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. And that speaks to the issues in the agenda that incorporate a gender lens. Latina issues are the nation's issues. So when we looked at the agenda, it was really critical that we looked at every single section, whether it was the economy, whether it was environment, immigration, health. We looked at every area. And the task of the Latina Task Force was really to apply a gender lens to every single section, to look at the economy and say, you know what, Latinos is disproportionately impacted by wage discrimination because they earn 54 cents per dollar a man paid. Many Latinas often are shouldered with the burdens of caring for families. So we have to look at fair family policies. There's so many issues that are woven throughout the agenda, and there's a really critical strategy that we apply. As Hector mentioned as well, it is the most gender inclusive and LGBT inclusive agenda in history. So that is historic, that is profound, and it's the diversity of the organizations at the table that we're able to make that happen. And one example that we looked at, when you look at a Latina, particularly around pregnancies, we have high unintended pregnancy rate. And as a reproductive justice advocate, I was so excited to see that we incorporated an ask to lift the bans that deny abortion funding for low-income Latinas. I mentioned 1 in 3 Latinos don't have any health insurance, but about a third also have insurance under programs like Medicaid. So we're able to take a bold stance and say, listen, these are programs that deny our low-income communities access to the health care that they need, no matter what. Right? No matter what service they need, they are entitled and they should get service in a way that's dignified. So I'm really proud to say that we looked at all aspects of the agenda. We looked at health, we looked at the economy, we looked at immigration, and we were sure to include a gender lens in all the work so that the Latina community was represented.
Thank you very much. And HLA has been critical of the fact that the federal government, as an employer, still doesn't achieve parity with its own workforce, with Latinos representing only 8.5% of the federal workforce. And HLA has called for the appointment of 4 cabinet members and more political appointees. Ken, why is this important? Why does it matter to have more Latinos working in federal government, especially at that level?
I'm glad you mentioned the 8.5% because at the beginning of your remarks you mentioned that we are 58 million Hispanics living in the United States, so that means that we're 17% of the population. So when you look at 8.5 in the federal workforce, that's such a dismal number. What's most worrisome about it is the fact that back in 2000, when President Bill Clinton issued the executive order that is still in force to address the chronic underrepresentation of Hispanics in the federal workforce, the percentage was 6.6%. So we're talking now 16 years later, we've only increased 1.8% in the federal workforce. This is simply unacceptable. And we are going to demand as a coalition that a new executive order be issued from January. In terms of the cabinet members, I think it's important that if we want a government that looks like America, that works for all Americans, we need to make sure that Latinos are represented at every level of the government, including the executive cabinet. This is of critical importance because this translates into policies that affects our community every day. The absence of representational number of Hispanics in the executive cabinet undercuts the government's ability to produce policies that are fair, that are inclusive, and that are responsive to the needs and the concerns of our community. And that is why this is such a critical item in the agenda.
Thank you so much. Now, Juan, this question is for you. aside from Latino workers in our country generally, the situation, of course, is more acute for Puerto Ricans, especially because the island has been going through a very bad economic crisis. In your opinion, what will policies like Promesa mean for the economic reality of Puerto Ricans on the island, and what are the alternatives or other proposals to effectively address that crisis?
So, Maria Elena, you know, the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda had been calling on congressional action to address the crisis in Puerto Rico for well over a year before it finally took action. It was an incredible showing of solidarity amongst all of us, because finally the country was recognizing one more time, and only does it every once in a while, that Puerto Rico is made up of citizens of the United States. We have to remind the country that it's so What was amazing about our initial positions on this issue was that solidarity was coalition. When a compañera like Janet Murguia talks on behalf of la raza of our Puerto Rico, it shows you the level of solidarity we have, it shows you the strength of our coalition. Of course, we are now at a point in which the crisis is a humanitarian crisis. It's beyond a physical crisis. It creates incredible hardships. The notion that any legislation can actually call or permit further austerity measures in Puerto Rico makes no sense whatsoever. Puerto Rico has already undergone austerity measures. It's laid off or fired so many workers. It's already done closing schools, hospitals. We need an incredible infusion of additional thinking, creative ways to still go for the economy. That's long-term, it's not just short-term. For us, at the NHLA, Promesa is the beginning of the process, not the end of the process. Of course, there are major differences of opinion on Promesa. And this particular year, 2016, had incredible attention in the country from the Supreme Court, White House, and the legislature, the Congress, on the status of Puerto Rico relative to the United States. Finally, all three levels of government are saying what so many people in Puerto Rico say. It's a colony. It requires additional attention to fix that colonial status. So in many ways, we are finally at a point in which we are talking about these things openly. We're at a point in which we have solidarity. We have differences of opinion about the actual legislation, but that doesn't make a difference at this point. At this point, we need to further dig deep into the lives of so many U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico. You know, at the same time Congress was debating Promesa, it honored the Borinqueniers. It honored the 65th Infantry for their valor in combat. It reminded the country that Puerto Ricanos and Puertorriqueñas have been part of the American family so long. It is incredibly important that NHLA and everybody in this group remember these things and strive for a better economic future for the island.
Thank you so much. I want to go back for a minute to the issue of the importance of having Latinos hold political appointments, but also NHLA has insisted of the need for an increase in the number of career employees. Al, in your perspective, why is it important to have Latinos represented in both career positions and political positions?
Thank you for the description of the problem of the representation of the government. But I'd like to point out the difference. A political executive. I'd like to underscore the difference between a political executive and a career executive. Political executives, and briefly, I'll go through this briefly, they take the policy torch from the White House, deliver it to each agency. At the agency level, then they give it to the career federal executive. They are the ones that take it down through the levels of the agencies. Each agency, they provide the administration, the implementation, day-to-day operations. But don't forget that all those policies that everyone on this panel is talking about, they are affected by one of these career executives of all the programs. Not only the career executives are important, all the high-level managers, all the other people below them, they are the ones that do the day-to-day hard work for all of us, everything you're talking about. The problem, again, underrepresentation there at all levels. We need to have Hispanics at all levels, because because I believe that by having Hispanics, they have more of they not just follow the letter of the law and the policy, they put their heart, they follow their heart, their souls, and the spirit of the policy and those laws. And they represent us more directly as Hispanics. We're not at the end there, we don't have the voice we should have. The other thing I want to say is that we need to make sure that the public, the media, and society at large understand that we don't have enough representation. They're going to start looking around, especially in 2050, we're going to be the 2050, we're going to be the majority. Minority is going to be the majority. Most of us will be Hispanics. And we need to make sure that we're represented at the level. We need to make sure that the public at large, Hispanic community, understand that how important not only all the policies that we're all talking about, but the people, the Hispanics, that implement them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Al. Dr. Rios, coming to you now. As we heard Jessica, she spoke to some of the health issues and some of the recommendations that the NHLA has put forth. From your vantage point, what are the two most critical health priorities that our lawmakers must address? And in addition to those, for the first time, NHLA has urged the federal government to categorize gun violence as a public health issue. Why is this critical and what is required?
Well, let me start broadly first. Healthcare is probably one of the most important issues that we have to deal with. I mean, everything's important, but NHLA's health committee, and I'm proud to be a co-chair of that health committee, has decided that we really need to take a look at the access to health for our communities. Without being healthy, students can't go to school, workers can't work, our soldiers can't go to the military. So it's a very fundamental right to be healthy and to lead healthy lives. But access to health care services, and I have to say mental health services, which goes to our point about gun violence, is so important. The access issues are limited to our communities. We have a major health care gap because we live in poor communities, whether urban, rural, along the Mexican border, in Puerto Rico, and we have a lack of education in our communities. Our parents have 8th grade graduation rates, but they don't have high school graduation. We have a lack of information within our families about how to access the healthcare system. So the healthcare system itself has to become more responsive, more culturally competent. We have promotoras that can help us navigate the system. Those are the kinds of policy recommendations for access we believe in. We also believe that the Affordable Care Act, probably the most transformative law in this country since Medicare for the elderly in 1965 and Medicaid for the poor. We now have a program in place from the federal government for all states to have exchanges so that more and more people can get insurance. Health insurance is a major reason for not going bankrupt and having access to health care financially. We need the undocumented to be able to buy into the exchanges. And I think in the first 100 days of the next president, with immigration reform as a major, major focus for us, health care for the undocumented. The other major importance is, again, lifestyle and prevention, and it's all the way from children to adults. We think of being sick and having sickness just with elderly people, right? The diabetics, the heart disease, the cancer. But it starts with children, and it actually starts with your babies. Because in our communities, we live in chronic stress with crime and, just living in poverty, not knowing where you're going to get your food and our families are afraid of getting into government programs, so we don't get into the meal programs in our schools. So we start having more stress. And that stress is what provides, I think, the reason for the chronic diseases in our communities, like diabetes and hepatitis C and HIV/AIDS. It's all related to the underlying stress. So to your point about gun violence is a mental health issue, and it is a public health issue. We have to start dealing with it. The CDC needs to do the research that we have recognized as a policy that doesn't exist. We also know that gun violence impacts all of our community, not just the policeman or the person that's getting shot or killed that we're hearing more and more about, but it impacts
children, young mothers, our families. So we really do need to take care of gun violence as a health issue. And then lastly, I'll just say that it's so important to know, and we've said this over and over again, out of all the doctors and nurses and dentists in this country, we only got 3%, 2%, 5%. We have very few Latinos going into healthcare. And it's the #1 industry, and jobs in this country are going to be increasing as the healthcare system consolidates and the hospitals buy up the medical groups and the insurance companies become bigger and everything else. So we really do need to start letting our children know, and especially in grammar school, to do good in math and science. And as the STEM programs increase with President Obama's STEM initiative in our Hispanic serving institutions, we can get more students to think about going on and becoming doctors and nurses and public health professionals. And I think that that's another major policy effort that NHLA has put forward, that we start linking education with healthcare jobs through the STEM programs. And we need, and of course, we do need leaders within our healthcare system at all levels, in the federal and state governments, to be able to push these policies, because without having the responsiveness of having the Latinos that come from our communities, we're never going to change the policies to be culturally competent and language appropriate for our communities.
I wanted to just add to the gun violence issue. We just completed our conference, the National Council of ASA, that we do annually, and we did it this past year, just recently, in Orlando. And obviously, we were just compelled by a lot of reasons over the years, but the NCLR's never taken a position on gun violence before in our 48-year history. There's been a lot of splits in our community, but on Saturday, I announced that for the first time in our history, NCLR was adopting a policy on gun violence prevention, and that we would support a ban on assault weapons, that we were going to support universal background checks, and that we would support other restrictions as consistent with our civil liberties and rights, and that we would support more data so that we can know how the Latino community is really impacted. We know it's disproportionately, but we really would like to see more of that drilled down. And then ultimately, we needed to see more and augmented funding for mental health access and services. So just wanted to thank our board of directors, our chair, Veronica Soto, is here today, and I want to thank our board for that really important leadership at an important time.
Thank you so much for sharing. Juan, you talked in the beginning in your TED Talk about over-incarceration of Latinos, and we're hearing more and more about deaths of Latinos in our community in the hands of law enforcement. Why have we not heard more about these issues in the media? When I say the media, I mean mainstream media, because I know that the DNC division covered quite a bit. In fact, we just had a special on Aquí Ahora News magazine that I presented with Teresa Rodriguez this Sunday on precisely those Latinos who have had encounters that have turned out not so well with law enforcement. What are the measures that must be taken from a policy perspective to address the increased criminalization of Latinos that you addressed in your opening remarks, and how do we get the rest of the media to also pay attention? Do we need to have a hashtag Latino Lives Matter?
Well, you know, the fact of the matter, thank you. But the fact of the matter is, thank you to Univision for covering these issues. They don't get covered enough, obviously, to other media outlets. They don't get the attention. It's not that we're not responding, because we are. The entire Latino community has been effective in responding to these issues at a very localized and regionalized level. The real question now is elevating that to a national discourse about how we're also affected by police violence, by other issues regarding criminal justice reforms. In many ways, the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda has started that goal. I mean, effectively, this agenda, the public policy agenda, we're taking positions that for the first time we're speaking about these issues openly. We're actually taking positions about drug policy reform because it affects so many of us. We're taking positions against the death penalty because you really cannot implement death penalty without failing this country. We've seen that for decades. We're taking positions against mandatory minimum sentencing. That's all about sentencing reform. We're taking positions about juvenile justice and making sure that that school to prison to deportation pipeline gets addressed. We're taking these positions because we're finally openly talking about these things. But I want to just talk about one, which you just mentioned about us as collectively. We need to do more. We need to do more amongst ourselves. We need to talk about how these issues affect us. We need to talk about these issues collectively. We need to talk about the solidarity that we have with the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to talk about that solidarity because many of us in urban America live the same socioeconomic conditions that affect African Americans. This is one of those issues that is a no-brainer for us. It's also a no-brainer for us because Latinos are black too. So at what level do we not embrace these issues? Do we collectively move this dial towards better criminal justice reform, police reform, toward policy reform? It will be to the betterment of the entire country. And I think that Univision is doing this is amazingly positive. But we need the CBSs, the NBCs, the entire mainstream media to pay attention to these issues as well.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to an issue I think is important to everyone. I know that in all the polls that Univision does, education comes up as probably the number one and two issues. Economy and education is what our people care about. Of course, the way of getting out of poverty, the way of the future, and the key to success in our community is to educate our children, especially because we have such a young community. And it's been very encouraging to see that the number of high school dropout in our community has gone down, dramatically, and also that there are more and more Latinos going to college. However, Latinos still lag behind other ethnic groups when it comes to college completion. And students, of course, are suffering the weight of this student loan debt. Brent, what are your recommendations, solutions to support students pursuing higher education? How do we get them to graduate? How do we get them to be able to afford finishing college?
Well, first of all, I wanted to acknowledge the great work that Univision is doing in this area, because through your leadership on the education issue, so many Latino families across the country are learning about the opportunities that they have to participate in different programs, but also about the new changes to the education law that we just passed in Congress, as well as the Common Core standards. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really amazing. Congratulations. So, very, very important question. I think, it all starts with early childhood education. One of NHLA's first planks in the education front is to make sure that all students have the opportunity